At exactly 6:02, a Russian Mi-8 lifted off from a forward operating base in northeastern Ukraine, its cargo bay packed with an assault team bound for Ukrainian defensive lines. So far, the morning flight had been routine, skimming treetops, hugging dirt roads, staying below radar coverage. The Russian crew had no idea that since 0400, 3 Ukrainian FPV teams had been waiting in the fog, eyes glued to screens, fingers on triggers. Thanks to partisan scouts deep behind the lines, all 3 operators received the same encrypted message at the exact same second. They had spread out to cover every possible route. One watched the M03 highway, another the northern farm tracks, the third the southern river valley. Miss this window and the Russian strike force would reach Ukrainian positions intact. Their secret weapon was an acoustic sensor network deployed weeks earlier. Using low-power LoRa protocol, it pushed tiny data packets up to 10 kilometers, while consuming less juice than an LED bulb. Dozens of modified smartphones, fitted with external microphones and hidden inside everything from fake rocks to trash bins, lay silent in the grass. Each one listened for the distinctive low-frequency thump of rotor blades. Sound travels at 343 meters per second. By measuring the microsecond differences in arrival time across multiple sensors, the system triangulated the helicopter's position down to 50 meters, even through thick fog and dense forest where radar and optics failed. The Mi-8's twin turbines produced a unique acoustic fingerprint between 20 to 40 Hz that cut through weather like a beacon. Think of it as Shazam for military aircraft. The first sensor picked up the telltale 35 Hz pulse. Within 4 seconds, 2 more nodes confirmed. Time difference calculations locked the helicopter's position inside a 50-meter circle, 5 kilometers out and closing fast. The hunt was on. The operator covering the M03 highway immediately launched his recon drone, while the northern operator scanned his acoustic feed. Still nothing on his lane. The southern operator, crouched near the river, was already running intercept angles for all 3 possible routes, knowing they'd have only seconds to react once the helicopter committed. The lead pilot glanced at his tablet. The acoustic net had painted a crystal-clear picture. A strong temperature inversion had formed at dawn. Cold air trapped under warmer layers, bending the rotor sound back toward the ground like a natural megaphone. The Mi-8's signature thump now carried 5 kilometers instead of 2. Bearing 285 degrees, speed 150 kilometers per hour, altitude 40 meters. The Russians were flying pure visual, hugging the highway, radios silent. Any emission would light them up for Ukrainian manpads, and GPS was useless under mutual jamming. Intercept math was brutal but doable. The Mi-8 had to stay low to dodge radar, follow roads to avoid getting lost, and hold steady speed to conserve fuel. If the drone teams could predict its path, pre-position their birds, and a dozen other variables aligned perfectly, history was about to be made. The lead operator reached for his primary Shrike 10, lying in the wet grass like a mechanical predator. A Frankenstein mashup of Chinese racing drone parts from China and old Soviet explosives that had refused to die. The PG-7M warhead was wired to the flight controller through a homemade piezo striker. Basically, a fancy cigarette lighter crystal that generated voltage on impact. Months in storage had let moisture creep into the hand-soldered joints. These weren't factory-fresh missiles from a defense contractor. They were garage-built suicide birds held together with zip ties, prayers, and pure spite. While he frantically fixed the corroded connection, the acoustic network painted an increasingly urgent picture in his earpiece. Still 285, 150 kilometers per hour, 40 meters. Then the update nobody wanted. Target just turned off M03 onto secondary dirt track, still west-northwest, now 7 kilometers from our forward positions. This wasn't the predicted route. Something had spooked the Russian pilot and sent him sightseeing. The patchy morning fog had meanwhile thickened into a solid wall rolling down from the Dnipro River, swallowing everything below 60 meters. 8 minutes left to solve an equation no one had ever solved before. In 2 minutes, the helicopter would vanish from every sensor except sound. and sound alone wasn't precise enough for the kill shot they needed. The northern operator, already repositioning his drone to the new intercept point, watched his controller go dark. The freezing cold had murdered the battery. He cursed, ripped out the spare pack he'd kept warm inside his jacket, and swapped it while the Mi-8 ate up another kilometre. His backup bird was everything the primary wasn't. Shorter legs, weaker video link, but most importantly, it still flew. A 3S Liart Pro pack would give maybe 8 minutes in 6 degrees Celsius air. The 1-watt video transmitter, half the power of the main one, would start breaking up at 5 kilometers. Ukrainian engineering doctrine is simple. If it's stupid and it works, it ain't stupid. He sealed the corroded connector with a blob of superglue that would probably melt once the motors heated up, but it only had to survive one flight. Seconds bled away as he powered up the spare. The southern operator was already airborne, racing toward the predicted intercept when his video feed dissolved into grey snow. At 6:18, the fog swallowed his drone completely. He was now flying blind on instruments that barely existed. Just a compass heading and mental math. The fog wasn't just blocking light, it scattered infrared and created acoustic shadows where rotor noise bent around pockets of moisture. For 90 endless seconds he flew through milk, staring at a screen that showed nothing but static. The only thing keeping him oriented was the calm voice in his headset, feeding constant acoustic updates. Target shifting from 290 to more westerly. Physics, however, is honest. The helicopter can't climb above the fog without painting itself on every radar screen for 50 kilometers. It can't stray far from the road without risking unmarked power lines that don't appear on any Russian map. It was trapped in the same white prison as the drones chasing it. And the clock was merciless. The acoustic team was now feeding constant updates. Target holding steady speed, 40 meters altitude, locked to the dirt track. They had guided it exactly where they wanted. The lead operator launched his backup drone straight into the fog, flying pure geometry toward the spot the helicopter had to appear. His battery read 75% and dropping faster than planned. The cold was thickening the internal resistance of the LiPo cells. Behind him, the Russian Borisogledsk 2 EW vehicle had detected the drone launch. Its crew was frantically sweeping the spectrum, hunting for the control frequency. But the open-source Express LRS system hopped up to 500 times per second. By the time they locked onto a signal, it was already gone, dancing to another channel. At 6:21, the Mi-8 punched out of the fog wall exactly where predicted, still glued to the dirt road like a train on invisible rails. The recon drone caught a brief visual confirmation, but celebration lasted half a second. Lead operator checked his battery. 60%, 3 kilometers still to cover. His drone maxed out at 100 kilometers per hour. The helicopter cruised at 150. Chasing was impossible. Intercepting, getting there first, was just math. Brutal, unforgiving math with zero margin for error. At 6:23, the lead drone reached the ambush point. Battery flashing angry red at 40%, counting down like a doomsday clock. He parked it 5 meters off the roadside field, props barely spinning to conserve power. Every percentage point now bought 7 seconds of flight time in the freezing air. He'd switched to analog 5.8 GHz video for its 20 millisecond latency, far better than digital's 100 milliseconds when milliseconds meant hit or miss. The world on his goggles looked like a snowstorm inside a kaleidoscope. The two backup operators were now in position, drones hovering at alternate points along the road in case the first strike failed. Near the front lines, Russian troops heard the distinctive buzz and radioed that drones were overhead. Meanwhile, the Borisogledsk 2 crew stared at their spectrum analyzer, showing ghost signals flickering across dozens of bands. They knew something was out there, but the frequency-hopping spread spectrum, jumping 50 channels a second, turned their jamming efforts into a joke. Russians had mastered jamming old-school single-frequency controllers, like blocking one radio station. Ukrainians had upgraded to fast LRS. Imagine a conversation that switches between 50 different phone lines every second. By the time the jammer cuts one line, the call is already on another. To any eavesdropper, it just sounds like random noise. The EW operators could sense a whisper in a crowded room, but never isolate it long enough to silence it. The Ukrainians heard it first through the acoustic net. The Mi-8's 5-blade rotor chopped the air at a precise 192 RPM, that signature syncopated thump growing louder. But in the fog, sound alone couldn't give exact range. 30 seconds later, the acoustic team called it. Triangulation now accurate to 50 meters. The trap was set. The helicopter was flying straight into it, and the clock showed less than a minute to impact. The helicopter flew dark. No lights, no radio, essentially blind and deaf to electronic threats, which also made it blind to the silent drone now lying directly in its path. Then, for one heartbeat, the sun broke through the fog and flashed off the Mi-8's cockpit glass. A perfect glint that gave away position, altitude, speed, everything. Range 300 meters, 40 meters AGL, 10 seconds to overfly. The pilot's eyes stayed glued to the road ahead. Soviet doctrine had never taught him to fear something this small. Below, at 6:24, the Mi-8 thundered overhead. The lead operator slammed the throttle forward. All 4 motors screamed to full current as the drone shot upward into the helicopter's rotor wash. Turbulence hit like a sledgehammer, flipping the little machine end over end across all 3 axes, while the pilot fought to keep orientation through a video feed that was now more static than picture. Closing speed was an agonizing 50 kilometers per hour. The Mi-8 was still gaining altitude when the drone climbed into its belly, but the operator had flown this exact suicide run 10,000 times in abandoned warehouses and simulators. One mistake there meant restart. One mistake here meant history wouldn't happen. The second operator watched through the chase drone's camera, ready to take the shot himself if the first failed. The third stayed high, recording everything that came next. From the footage, it's impossible to tell if the Russian crew ever saw the drone coming. Impact 0625. The shaped charge detonated instantly. A PG-7N warhead doing exactly what physics has allowed it to do since the 1960s. The copper liner collapsed into an 8,000 meters per second jet of molten metal that punched clean through 300 millimeters of rolled armor like it wasn't there. The Mi-8's aluminum skin was barely 2 millimeters thick. In seconds, the entire helicopter became a fireball. It rolled inverted and slammed into an open field in a column of black smoke and burning fuel. The chase drone dove in low, filming the wreckage to confirm the kill. The footage you're seeing now. The Russian Borisogledsk II, still frantically jamming frequencies that weren't in use, didn't even know its helicopter was gone until the emergency locator beacon began screaming. By then, the Ukrainian drones had already vanished. Their operators were packing gear and disappearing into the tree line before the first retaliatory shells arrived. A $500 hobby-grade drone, guided by a guerrilla acoustic network and garage-built grid, had just bypassed multi-million-dollar electronic warfare suites and achieved what military planners had called impossible. The world's first confirmed FPV drone kill against a helicopter in combat. Not luck, not accident. Pure ingenuity, math and raw courage colliding in one perfect second of history. See you in the next one.